They'd sort out more consecutive shows in Madison Square Gardens than Coldplay. And so I had to look through the newspaper for a job, and believe it or not, there was actually a job in the newspaper that just said, brand manager wanted, call Mike. And I took a punt and called the mobile number, and it was the general manager of the Wiggles in Australia.
Fall into licensing, and then no one wants to get out of it.
And it's also just like, you feel like you just fall like Alice down the rabbit hole, and you're like, what is this world? And why didn't anybody tell me about this before? A woman who had taken a naked photo of herself. They would go neck and neck with AC/DC.
How do you keep that popular? How do you keep it fresh? How do you keep it relevant?
The preschool age range is the only demographic of all demographics that is reborn every year and has the exact same needs forever. I just got lucky.
How do you manage this flood, this never-ending queue of licensing requests that would have come your way?
Well, I mean,
what happens when you're managing licensing for the hottest kids brand on the planet? Michelle Ahern lived this reality with the Wiggles during their peak popularity. From handling thousands of licensing requests to creating Wigglesworld theme park, she witnessed firsthand how a beloved property can transform into a global licensing phenomenon. Today, she shares the secrets of working with the world's most in-demand children's brand. There are some really fun moments in this conversation, and I think you'll like it. Before we dive into today's show, I wanted to share something really exciting with you. For the first time ever, I'm opening my vault of nearly 20 years of licensing experience through my online course, Learn to License. Whether you're just starting out or looking to level up your licensing game, this is everything I wish I'd known when I began my journey. From deal structures to finding the right license, knowing if you're ready and how to pitch like a pro, it's all there. The fundamentals that separate successful licensors from everyone else. Visit learntolicense.com and let's get you from curious to confident. Now, let's jump into today's episode. So Michelle, I'm really excited to talk to you today because we're going to focus on what it's like to work on a property that is at its absolute height of popularity. But before we dive in, let's talk a little bit about you. Tell us about your background and your experience in licensing.
Yeah, so I started in licensing about 25 years ago, and I think, like most, it happened by accident. I'd actually, at university, I'd studied communications and had an interest in maybe journalism or maybe business, and I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, and a friend of mine recommended to me, hey, have you ever thought about doing brand licensing or brand management? And I was like, I don't even know what that is. And they said, it's actually a really nice mix of creativity and business. And so I actually just started at the time the internet didn't even exist, because that's how old I am. And so I had to look through the newspaper for a job. And believe it or not, there was actually a job in the newspaper and it just said, brand manager wanted, call Mike, with a mobile number. And I took a punt and called the mobile number. And it was the general manager of the Wiggles in Australia looking for somebody to enter the world of licensing and consumer products that they could essentially teach everything to. So it sounds like a ridiculous storyline from a movie, but that is how I entered the world of licensing in what was at the time, and they are still so incredibly relevant, but at the time was the number one preschool property in Australia and probably in the world at the time as well, actually, when I joined the team.
And I think that it's interesting because there is a consistent thread when I speak with everybody in licensing, and that is that they just fell into licensing. I fell into licensing, you fell into licensing, everybody kind of just falls into licensing, which I think is such a great thing about our industry. You fall into licensing and then no one wants to get out of it because they love it so much.
And it's also just like, you feel like you just fall like Alice down the rabbit hole, and you're like, what is this world? And why didn't anybody tell me about this before? And then once you're in it, there's just so many moving parts to it. I think if you are the sort of person that likes dynamic environments and you like creativity, but you like business, but you like strategy, but you like networking, it sort of really ticks all those boxes. And yeah, it's fantastic. I think that's why it's so addictive, because there's something for everyone once you're inside,
So let's talk about the Wiggles, because that's what I really wanted to focus on today. For those listening who may not know a lot about the Wiggles, can you bring them up to speed?
Yes. So in 1991, a children's preschool property was born, and it was actually born out of it was a fantastic rock band in Australia called the Cockroaches, and it was a number of musicians that got together, and one of those musicians was a guy by the name of Anthony Field. And when the band, they were an adult, fantastic, amazing rock band, when that band sort of wrapped up, Anthony was actually deciding to study children's education, took himself off to university, and as part of a university project, he decided, well, I'm a musician. What about kids' music as preschool, education? Because children learn through play. And this was this whole world that he was discovering. So he went to a couple of his old bandmates from the Cockroaches and a couple of his other classmates and put together a kids' music CD, or actually cassette, I should say at the time. If anybody doesn't know what that is, you can ask ChatGPT, what is a cassette? And they went to the ABC, which was the children's broadcasting network and large media platform in Australia, and basically just pitched it and said, hey, we've got a kids' music album. And it absolutely took off. Now, I think is one of those things where when I say it absolutely took off, it's very easy for me and a lot of other people that came along 5, 10, 15 years into it, because I know that the boys often used to say it took us 15 years to be an overnight success. And so I think that's how it felt for a lot of people, like, where did these guys come from? But essentially they were born out of preschool education. So 3 of the 4 original Wiggles were early childhood educators from various universities in Australia. And so they're early childhood educators with musical background or passion for music and entertaining kids. And obviously one of the biggest things they'd learned during their studies was that children learn through play. And that you can be pre-literate, literally pre-language, and still obviously absorb information if you look at how much children learn. And so was born a kids band at the time that then went on to become the largest preschool property in Australia. It was actually at one stage as well, it was the largest export, as like financial export Australia ever had. So I think they were in the Forbes, I'm going to get these numbers wrong now, Joanne, because it's been a while since I've recited this information, but they were highest grossing entertainers. They would go neck and neck with AC/DC each year. And so it obviously started as music, and then it became TV, and then it became live action. That was one of the biggest things they did, was obviously performing the music live, and they would do concerts all over Australia. Again, originally they started in a car park selling cassettes out the back of a van, entertaining kids.
What a story.
And it just grew and grew. And then by the time I joined them, which was just after it was sort of between their 10 and 15 year mark, I joined them in around 2003 or 2004. And by then they obviously were already a global phenomenon. We had 55 licensees in the US, around 25 in Australia. We were looking at, moving from beyond just having the Wiggles in English. It sort of just started as music and then became 4 or 5 different revenue streams for this sort of global business, with consumer products and licensing being a huge part of that. I think also as well, when a brand is a live product or a living being, whether it's an artist or a performer or a sporting team, creating revenue streams and sustainability for the business that's beyond the actual individuals, I think is something that's really critical, because obviously you need sustainability, you need growth. That's what, consumer products was a natural part, because obviously kids wanted to be able to have the Wiggles at home with them beyond the music and the TV. So yeah, that's sort of how that started.
So you called Mike, you got the job. And so what was your role specifically? What was your kind of day-to-day managing the licensing relationships?
Yeah, so look, when I joined the team, they were a family-run operation. I think there was only about 5 of us that worked at Wiggle House, as we called it, a Wiggle HQ. And so the largest part of the business was the production and the live events and the touring and the music, but there was a core of about 5 of us in the actual office. And so my job was going to be to manage the consumer products, but also it needed to be like anything when you're in a small operation. It was a bit of jack of all trades. So I did everything from answering fan mail to doing a lot of being a bit of an admin support there was 2 general managers at the time. Mike Conway and Paul Field, and I worked between the two of them. So I worked with Mike very closely on business development and legal and sort of being a bit of an admin support really for him. And then with Paul Field on the consumer products and all the branding and marketing. And I literally had a front row seat to learn how to do licensing, how to do marketing, how to do branding, how to put a product on the shelf and watch it sell. You know, it was just such a magic opportunity on so many levels, you know.
Are there any fan mail stories you can share with us? Any highlights? Anything that you remember? Any weird ones came through?
They were all weird. Let's just say the fan mail was not from children.
Really? Okay.
They all four of the so when I joined the Wiggles as well, it was originally four artists. It was Murray Cook, Jeff Fatt, Greg Page, and Anthony Field were the four original Wiggles. And that's why if you hear me say the boys, that's who I'm referring to, the four original guys that created all the music and still maintain all the original licensing rights to their own music, which is just incredible. So they had a lot of fans that were mums and single women and probably some men too. But yeah, there was one particular woman who had taken a naked photo of herself, cut it into many, many small pieces to make a puzzle, and would post us one piece per week. Yeah. And I remember that being for Anthony. And the boys would come in to get their mail because obviously we collected at the office, and they'd come in and say, oh, you know, have we got any mail? Like, well, you know, have we got any contracts you need me to sign or whatever? And I'd be like, well,
we got another piece.
Got a nipple for you. Yeah. So look, there was a lot of fans as well that would follow them, like you do with any rock band that you're really interested in. There were fans that would go to every single show and follow them around. So there was obviously this huge uptake with the kids, but also with the adults as well. And I mean, so it just really cut through on so many levels, which is why now even in Australia they do reunion shows for adults. Because obviously now the original Wiggles demographic are grown people with their own children.
So there's some serious nostalgia now. Adults will come to the show and sing Hot Potato with the Wiggles and just remember back to their childhood.
That's it. And it was absolutely fascinating to witness, because the other thing was there was so many questions when the brand first started. It was like, well, how long can this go on for? Obviously, the four individuals are going to age or have other things going on in their lives. So how do we, you know, protect the brand against that and or, you know, create opportunities there? And also there was questions around, like it was just how sustainable is this? Are the artists interchangeable? Was one of the really big questions that we had as well, because it was so reliant on these four guys doing. Their touring schedule was just mind blowing. I mean, I remember it was either the first or second year I was with them, so it must have been around 2004, 2005. They sold out Madison Square Gardens. They'd sold out more consecutive shows in Madison Square Gardens than Coldplay.
Wow.
I know, and I remember I went to New York. It was one of the first toy fairs that we were going to there, and the boys were actually there performing at the Toys R Us store in Times Square. And so my job was like, this is literally my first 6 months. They're like, Michelle, we need you, you know, you can go. We've got toy fairs on in New York, or maybe it was licensing, but the boys are going to be performing. So can you just help us like manage the crowd? And I was like, the crowd, like they're a kids band from Australia. And they were performing on the roof of the Toys R Us on the top floor, and the line to see them perform went down the 5 floors of Toys R Us and up and around like 2 blocks of Times Square. And I was just like, what is this madness?
So how did that crowd management job go? Were you okay? I can see you there, arms folded, security, Michelle Ahern, you know, holding people back.
Tell Dorothy the dinosaur we've got a code 1000 on Madison Avenue. It was serious business. It was mad. Do you know the other hilarious thing was that one of the biggest tricky sort of logistics for the live shows was where to park all the strollers. and the prams.
Of course, of
So
course.
every show, like one of the biggest tour, but our tour operator, one of her number one jobs was like pram parking.
Find space. Where
Yeah,
can we
it's
have, where is there a big space for people to go and put all their
yeah,
prams?
it was mental.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that, it was such an interesting. Anyway, you can probably steer me where you want to go because there's so many facets to this.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about specifically about what it's like to work with the hottest brand in the world. Because I feel like this right now, BBC Worldwide are dealing with Bluey just being this phenomenon.
Yeah.
And everyone's knocking on their door wanting to work with Bluey. Everybody wants a Bluey license. Everybody wants, just to collaborate with that brand. And I imagine that's what it was like when you're working with the Wiggles. So I'm curious to know, how do you manage this flood, this never-ending queue of licensing requests that would have come your way? How do you even manage that?
Well, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, we had incredible licensing agents. To be honest, we could not have filtered through it all. That they were the first gate for us. Like it became like really, really critical for them to sort of run a filter for us. So obviously relying on agents in the different territories that we had to really be able to be the first line of defense to help us understand what was a worthwhile opportunity and what wasn't. And obviously we were based in Australia. We'd obviously been doing it for 10, 15 years by this stage, but there was always different things happening in different markets. We were trying to break into the UK market. That's completely different to the US market. We were looking at reformatting the brand and dubbing it into different languages throughout Europe and China and South America. So we really first and foremost, we relied heavily on having subject matter experts in each territory. So that
Did
was
you
a
give
given.
them some kind of like parameters, or say like, don't bring us deals that are in this category or less than this value, or like were
Yeah.
there kind of parameters that you put in place?
Yeah, look, we did have parameters in place, but they were never financial because, to be honest with you, the main thing, this is what was also just really special about working for the Wiggles, was that because they were sort of homegrown, family-based, a group of friends, a family creating a business that was born out of entertaining children, the number one rule on everything was what's in it for the kids. And as in what's beneficial for children, not just like, oh, let's just give them candy, or even like if they needed to do a TV appearance, they wouldn't just go on camera and just perform for cameras. They'd be like, get a local school in, bring the kids in, like we are here for the kids. And so that sort of ethos of like, what's healthy for kids, what's beneficial for kids, what's socially, developmentally appropriate for a 2 to 5-year-old, which was the age bracket at the time. And that then applied to everything else. So one of the most straightforward things, we were very big on health and safety for children. We were very big on like health and, and being food conscious as well. Like obviously songs like Fruit Salad
I was
and
going to ask that. So, like did you have like nutritional standards? You had to, if there was a food or beverage partner that came to
yeah,
you, they had to share, the nutritional makeup of the product to make
yeah.
sure it wasn't high in sugar, high in salt, high in fat, anything like that.
Yeah, so we had a nutritionist that was part of our team. So we had a nutritionist and dietitian that was a consultant, and so our licensing agents knew we wouldn't deal with anything with sugar above whatever was the level at the time, and so it was only natural sugars X, Y, Z. So if somebody came along and they were selling chocolate or something, it was just a no-go. I think at the time we were the only successful preschool property globally to never endorse confectionery.
Did that include like even seasonal calendars, like Christmas
Everything.
calendars? So it was
Even
basically a flat out.
even like a kid's juice box, and the orange flavor is 5 milligrams of sugar or 5 grams of sugar tick, but the pineapple flavor is 10, not doing pineapple. So it was like to that extent. So there was, I can't remember the exact number now, but it was whatever was a healthy level of natural sugar for children. And that was just across the board. So we had
That's great.
we had a nutritionist and a dietitian that we worked with. And even when we got beyond the shelves with FMCG, and I'll talk to you about this in a little bit because it was my favorite license we ever did. I'll tell you about that in a second. But because even when we were in like food and beverage outlets, that still applied. So we were very, very strict on, I guess, the morals and the principles and the values that were at the core of the brand itself, that applied to the music, that applied to the live shows, the language that they would use when they were addressing kids in the audience. They never said boys and girls. They always said, hey, everyone. Like these sorts of like very fundamental rules that they had about the performance and the brand applied to everything. So it became, it was very easy to follow because it was like, is this of value to children? Is this healthy? Is this safe? And that just became, and so our licensing agents knew that as well. They knew that we wouldn't go near anything that didn't sort of meet that criteria.
Yeah. And so you've got these agents all around the world. I mean, how did you decide what opportunities to say yes to and what opportunities to say no to? I mean, you've sort of covered that off to say, we've got these specific parameters that they need to stay in. But let's say, for example, an agent was coming to you with a pajamas partner, but actually there was 3 or 4 companies, which would have been the case, that wanted to work with you, wanted to license the Wiggles and put them on their pajamas. How would you decide which one was best? Would you lean on your agents to say, like, in our market, we think this is the best partner, or did you have another criteria when assessing?
Look, definitely always the licensing agents knew what was what. They would say, look, and it all came down often to strategic partnerships as well. So, for example, if we didn't have presence in a particular retailer that we were trying to break into, our licensing agent might say to us, hey, this apparel partner actually has placement at this particular retailer. And if we get in with that buyer, that gives us opportunities with XYZ. So it was strategic in that regard. So that's where we'd rely on the licensing agents and also the licensees to know the retailers in that market. But we also took it really, really seriously ourselves to make sure we had those relationships. So myself and our general manager, Paul Field, would go to every buyer meeting, retailer meeting, licensing show, toy fair that we could go to. So that we were, because, like Paul always used to say, nobody will sell the Wiggles like the Wiggles. So, we took that really seriously in terms of like showing up to support our licensees and our partners as well. So I think taking your relationship seriously, relying on subject matter experts in each territory about what was strategic, that was a really big thing. And also because there was so many moving parts to what we were doing internally, we took it upon ourselves. Like there was no way a licensing agent would be able to keep up with what was happening, because every other day we were, actually, we've just got a new TV series, because we had our own production studios. So there was literally content coming out daily at times. So that was the other big thing, is that we took a lot of responsibility in making sure that our partners and our licensees were up to date with what we were doing, so that they had the best opportunity to sort of maximize that as well.
And that is an important part of the role of the licensor, is to make sure that the licensing agents had completely kept up with what's happening with the brand, all the activity. The other thing to bear in mind is that your licensing agents wouldn't have just represented the Wiggles. They would have represented a portfolio of other brands they need to be fully across as well.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you find working with licensing agents, and how did you make sure that they were giving the Wiggles the, priority that you needed them to give?
We were really lucky. We were really lucky actually with our licensing agent at the time in Australia. We worked with a couple of different agents, but in both cases, we were with Gaffney Licensing, and then we were also with Merchant Wise. And in both situations, we had our own incredible account manager, from one or business manager, looking after us. And most of the time, we were the only thing they would work on, because it was such a full-time job. But then, we relied really heavily on the expertise of that entire agency. So, for example, when we were with Gaffney and we had Deanna Markovic looking after us, who was incredible, she also knew roughly what was happening everywhere else in that business, because she was part of the agency. So that allowed us to tap into what else is happening and trending in the kids market while still having that dedicated focus. So yeah, we were very lucky. I think also as well because we were about relationships and we were about, and Paul was very, very big on that. He was very, very close with everybody that he worked with and liked to hire agencies or people that he knew would be, you know, people that he could have an honest conversation with, people that he trusted. Trust was very big for us. I think it was I think because it was born out of such a personal project and a family, that really permeated everything that we did in a really good way.
A quick pause here. If what we're discussing is really resonating with you, you're going to love what I've put together in Learn to License. This isn't just another course. It's 2 decades of real-world licensing experience distilled into actionable strategies you can use immediately. I've worked with everyone from startups to Fortune 500 brands, and the patterns for success are surprisingly consistent. The course covers all things that you need to consider when it comes to licensing, particularly those who are just starting out. So visit learntolicense.com. Your future licensing deals will thank you. All right, back to our conversation. I think one of the other challenges when you're dealing with the luxury of having the hottest brand for preschool kids or any demographic really is not only is everybody kicking down your door wanting to work with you, you're signing partners, but then the job is only just beginning as the licensor. You've got to go through product development. You've got to support licensees getting into retail. Again, I know that your licensing agents would have done a lot of the heavy lifting here, but how did you deal with the product development process, navigating approvals, timelines, making sure product was getting to market on time?
Yeah. So I was a one-person licensing team inside the licensor. So there was nobody else that worked on the licensing and the approvals. Obviously, I worked closely with Paul, but, whether it was Deanna or then we had the amazing Kate Carroll, who worked with us as well, they would churn through the work and basically we just had to work. My job all day, every day was just what do they need? I need to move as quick as possible because I knew that they were moving mountains. So, managing timelines, they'd manage my expectations about this is what's a priority in getting this particular product to retail. And so I'd have obviously the Australia team and then I'd have the US team. You'd have 2 different time zones that you're working with throughout the day. And my job was just to make sure everything got out the door. And then I'd often have, say, for example, if we were developing a book, we had our own illustrator. So very rarely would we allow a third party to develop their own illustrations. So in the early days, so there'd always be that added element of like, hey, I need to check in with our illustrator if we're developing a book, or hey, I actually need to check in with the nutritionist on the sugar content of this. We also had another early childhood educator who was like my go-to person that we'd check in on, like if there was particular content being developed, again, around stories and things. So it was my job to just make sure that I hit all the timelines. And how do we do that? I don't know. You just get it done.
You just do it one day at a time.
Yeah, and I was just a one-person team, but that's where you have to just work so closely with your partners,
Yeah, of course. You mentioned before that there was a favorite deal that you worked on. Tell us about that. I'm curious to hear.
So quite a ways into the business, then opportunity came up with a theme park in Australia. So there's a big theme park up in Queensland called Dreamworld. They approached us and said, when families come to a theme park, there's something for everybody from 7 and up. Like, what's a 2-year-old doing in a theme park? And so they said, we'd like to design an area that is for toddlers and babies even. And they said, we think that like the Wiggles is obviously a brand that would translate there. Would you be interested? And so we set out creating the first of what was many Wigglesworld. So the first one we did was in Dreamworld in Australia, and we had basically there was a bit of infrastructure existing already there, but then they said, hey, we can develop anything. So they said we could do dark rides, which is when you go inside like a tunnel or something. They said we can have like there's going to be a food and beverage outlet. There's going to be a soft play area, but we had to sit down and ideate from the ground up. What would Wigglesworld feel like? Okay, of course, kids have to be able to sit in the big red car. That was such an iconic part of the brand. There needs to be Wiggle House. We need the characters. Are they alive? Are they puppets? Is it on a digital screen? So there was like a 360 degrees sort of like how do we bring this to life so that kids can come into this environment and feel like they're literally in the world of the Wiggles? And so we did that in Dreamworld, and that was the first test case. And then we ended up rolling it out across the US at the Six Flags theme parks. So we ended up doing that deal across the US. So I remember at one time, I can't remember how many we ended up in. I remember at one time there was at least 3 or 4 theme parks we were developing. And that's where we really put the brand to test as well, because things like the food and beverage outlet in an American theme park, and we were like, you can't have Coke on the menu. You can't have hot dogs on the menu. You can't, and that was a real tug of war trying to figure out what to put on a menu.
I bet, because the theme parks would have had their own arrangements with suppliers, like exclusive arrangements with beverage suppliers and so forth.
Absolutely. So we had to try and get deals carved out that were just for the particular toddler area. But it was really interesting because we were working with existing infrastructure and also coming up with new ideas in terms of the actual environment. So I remember they had these pre-existing ride that was like little helicopters, and kids could sit in the helicopter and go around. So we redesigned those to be the wags, the doggy copters, and all the propellers were dog bones and stuff like that. So we were always, really playing in the nuances, and it was always a very niche brand. It was like, okay, how can we do this? And how can we apply it here and there? It was never a logo slap. It was, and I know all brands, or most brands do it these days. It really is an integrated experience of how can people really feel like they're inside this? And so I can only imagine what it's like for the guys over at Bluey and doing that now, because just when the whole world wants at you, I think one of the great advantages of that brand is obviously that it's animation and it's not relying on real life people with lives and children and families, and that it can exist in perpetuity. Bluey can be as old or as young as they need her to be forever. So yeah, that's interesting.
Let's talk a bit about having the hottest, most popular kids brand. How do you keep that popular? How do you keep it fresh? How do you keep it relevant? I mean, you mentioned, earlier you were looking at ways like, how can this brand live on without relying on the individuals, the cast of the Wiggles, essentially. But the other thing that's really interesting to me is that a preschool brand can be in and out sometimes, because, what a 2-year-old will like, they probably won't be interested in 2 years' time. So there's this never-ending kind of stream of kids coming in and out of preschool properties. How did you maintain that popularity, knowing that your main core consumer, you'd only have maybe 2, 3, maximum 4 years with them before something like the Wiggles would become uncool for, say, a 6 or 7-year-old, if I'm right in saying that?
Yeah, look, that is true, but it's also the opposite is also true, in that the preschool age range is the only demographic of all demographics. It's the only demographic that is reborn every year and has the exact same needs forever. So what is developmentally appropriate for a 2-year-old in 2025 was also developmentally appropriate for a 2-year-old in 2015 and 2002. Whereas if you look at, say, what a 12-year-old is into now versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago, it's completely different. So it's a demographic that is reborn every year. So even if you're just looking at the 0 to 4 or 2 to, it was 2 to 5 at the time, and I know now it sort of skews even younger. But what's appropriate now, so like the music that resonates, like that 4-beat music, the fact that it's about color, movement, shape, sound, that's why they've been going for 30 plus years.
I guess what's changed,
it's still relevant.
What's changed a bit is how they consume now, right? So, preschoolers today are given iPads to watch the Wiggles, whereas back then it would have been on TV. There would have not been content on demand, but the fundamental of what a preschooler needs hasn't changed.
That's it. And so what that meant was, like, if you put a song out, like, that song is always going to exist. Like, we didn't need to necessarily change existing content. However, they were absolute masters at fresh content all the time. there was music, there was live action, there was theme parks, there was TV series, then there was, what else? There was the consumer products. So there was like, and then, the live action TV show, then we did an animated series, then we did a spin-off for Dorothy, and then we did a spin-off for Wags the dog. And so it was like all these constantly coming up with new ways of evolving the brand, literally daily at some point. Like
Impossible for parents to avoid.
I know at one stage, I think we had like 25 music albums. They were up to, sort of 10 or 15 TV series. We had our own music studios and TV production studios. So literally they'd be like, we need a new series. What are you guys doing tomorrow? Let's go. They'd sit down, write the scripts and just go for it. And they'd bring their cast in from the live action show to be also the cast of the TV series. So they were masters at keeping the content fresh, keeping the audience engaged. And that just gave everybody plenty to play with from a licensing and a broadcast and an entertainment perspective. So I think the fact that their content was relevant, so parents were happy, kids were engaged because it was developmentally appropriate for them. Like, like I'm a 2-year-old and I'm actually absorbed by the fact that there's moving color and shape on this screen. So like the product worked, and it was always going to work because even though that age group ages out, the next lot comes through. And also I think even during sort of any sort of economic downturn, any sort of financial crisis, the last thing that a family cuts from their budget is spending on their kids. So, parents will go without certain things they need. Families will go without sort of nights out and dinners out. But the one thing they will never, it will be the last thing to cut is like what their kids need or what their kids enjoy, So again, that's where you're sort of carving out, your front of mind,
The Wiggles, a recession-proof brand. Essentially.
And it was like, you got to be good quality. This is the thing as well. They were incredible artists and still are, and that's the thing is that they were great musicians. They were great content creators. They were great kids, educators and entertainers. And I think that's where like product quality, you got to have the goods,
So we've talked a lot about the Wiggles being, the hottest brand in the world when you were working with them. What advice can you offer someone listening today? They want to get a Bluey license or a Peppa Pig license. They're really wanting the hottest preschool license right now. How can they stand out when pitching to a licensor or an agency representing a really hot property that's just in so much high demand right now?
Yeah. Look, I think, speaking from my experience, any licensee or company that came along that had done their due diligence in understanding what we stood for and really looked at what we'd done previously, it always stood out for us. Like if somebody came to us and they say, look, we see that you are really focused on education for preschoolers and we have product XYZ. Like if people came to us blindly and just went, we make mobile phones for kids or, whatever, would be like, you're missing the point of what we do. I think just being tuned into the brand that you're trying to sell into and making sure that like what you're offering actually would make sense for their audience, that made it a lot easier. It just felt, people want to you kind of, I was going to say it's like going on a date where you want to actually just feel listened to and understood or like, so it was like, I think, knowing what that brand stood for was a really important thing for us because, that was sort of the first thing that I would say is do your due diligence in understanding the values of that brand. I think also at the end of the day, any strategic commercial opportunity, if you are doing something different, if you have access to a different retailer, if you have found a way to cut through in a completely different industry that didn't exist yet. Obviously, when I started for the Wiggles, we didn't have a website. The internet hadn't launched yet. And so obviously, stepping into that world, anybody that could come along and say, hey, we're actually doing XYZ in the entertainment space from a digital point of view, so somebody that can be a subject matter expert, give you cut through in for a new revenue stream or a different sort of, economic opportunity, be strategic, and also know the brand that you're pitching to. Like, don't just go in blindly going, hey, this is our product, it's amazing. It's like, tell us why it aligns with us and what value it's going to add. Because that was a big thing for us. It's like, yeah, what value is this adding to a child's life? Like, let's start there.
So it needs to be more than them back in the day saying, oh, look, the Wiggles is the hottest brand in the world right now. We're going to try and work with the Wiggles. You need to be able to demonstrate why it makes sense on both sides. Like, you don't want to...
It's got to make sense. Yeah, absolutely. And stuff, because then it's a no-brainer for parents as well. It's like, oh, like I remember Hit Entertainment in the US had the number one toy of the year was a wiggly guitar. I mean, brilliant. It's a band. The kids want to play the guitar. And the guys had this amazing guitar that literally the neck of the guitar like wiggled like this. It was the wiggly guitar. Great, makes sense.
Totally. I mean, that makes perfect sense. So if you're listening to this now and you want a Bluey license or you want a Peppa Pig license, think as hard as possible about why it not only makes sense to you. Like, yes, you've probably established now that if you have a Bluey license or a Peppa Pig license, it's going to be a success. But why should the licensor do it? Why should BBC Worldwide or Hasbro work with you? Why does it make sense? Why does that collaboration make sense to their consumer, the consumer of Peppa Pig or Bluey?
That's it. How does it make sense to the consumer? That's right. Because I think, again, with, for example, these kids' properties, obviously you've got two consumers. You've got the adult making the purchase and you've got the child who's engaged with the product. So if you can sell the story to both of those demographics, I think that's important as well. If you can show the value to the parents and the value to the kids, I think that makes it hard to refuse as well for a licensor.
So, Michelle, working with such a popular IP like the Wiggles, how did that shape your career in licensing, and what lessons did you sort of take from that and carry through to where you are today?
Look, it opened so many doors for me that I was genuinely just so lucky to be given an opportunity just blindly. I had no experience in licensing. It was purely, hey, we just want the right personality fit and we'll teach you everything. So I think being somebody taking a punt on me was an opportunity I'll never forget. And because from there, after doing that for 5 years, it then opened a lot of other doors, because people assume that people would assume, oh, you're the reason they were so successful. No. I was just one of the lucky people that was there, but I got a front row seat to how to make it all work and to so many facets of a business. And I think that was something that I was really lucky, is that because it meant I'd worked in entertainment, TV, music, live events, and consumer products all just by having one job. And so that made it easy for me to step into various jobs. I ended up, I stayed in licensing for a while. At the time I went and worked for a licensing agent and got to work with other incredible licensors around the world. And then I went into sport for a while. I worked, so that the AFL, the Australian Football League, basically were interested in my skill set, because they were like, you understand what makes kids and adult or families tick in terms of entertainment. Well, guess what? Sport is entertainment. How do we actually take what you know about the Wiggles and apply it to football? And I ended up working in football for a while as well. So it opened a lot of doors. It opened my mind to different facets of different businesses.
How was it going from working with the Wiggles, the hottest brand in the world of the time, and then you continued on your career in licensing, and you would have worked with some brands that were good, but not like as in demand? I mean, how did that feel? Was that a new challenge?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, because I think every brand has its own unique aspects to it. And, what I really enjoyed as well was I really wanted the opportunity to step out of preschool, and I got the chance to work on, brands with Warner Brothers and Lucasfilm that were older, and, brands that I was a real nerd about. I was a Star Wars nerd. So, like getting that opportunity, was amazing. And obviously they're really successful brands as well. But I worked on a lot of, I just really cared about, again, I think when you're in the kids space and you see the joy on the end user's face, and you know how much it means for a kid to be into whatever it is that they're into, it just makes it easy to do your job, because you care about putting a good quality product in front of them. I think that's the other thing was that that's what I took with me, is that I took a lot of really high standards with me from the Wiggles, because then I was able to apply that. But yeah, so I think any brand is going to have its challenges, and just because the Wiggles were and still are incredibly successful, but you know, even when I was at the Wiggles, like, sure, it was easy to sell into the US and the Australian market. I'll tell you what, trying to sell the Wiggles into the UK, it just had no translation, because it was just viewed as, oh, we don't get it. There's like these four middle-aged men in like skivvies. Like, what? And I
Isn't that
think it's really
interesting?
yeah.
Why do you think the US got it but the UK didn't?
I think I think the I think Australia and the US culturally, and particularly when I was growing up, most of my pop culture and movie and entertainment and everything was very US focused. And I think the UK, and this is just my own opinion, the UK was very UK centric in terms of its cultural reference points. It didn't really consume a lot of American. I think Australia and America had very much a two-way street in terms of pop culture. If anything, Australia ingesting a lot of American culture. Like, all the TV shows I watched growing up, 90% of them would have been American, 1% would have been Australian, would have been Neighbours. And there might have been one or two UK shows that I watched. I remember watching like Press Gang and like other TV shows like that growing up, which is definitely aging me now saying stuff like that. So I think culturally, Australia and the US translated a lot easier. I think the music and the touring side was a lot more straightforward. I think when it came to the UK, by the time we got round to that, it just didn't translate. I think they didn't like the Australianness of it, didn't quite translate. If I'm honest, I think that they felt that it was a bit lowbrow, because they wanted, particularly when it comes to early childhood education, they wanted British accents, they wanted English sensibilities and cultural reference points. And I think that was an element of it, which, so I remember going to lots of meetings, trying to sell it in, and the UK was always the toughest market, which is even why now. So I live in Europe now, and even when some people I talk to, I say I worked at the Wiggles, and if they grew up in the US, they're like, "Wow, that's crazy." And then if they're from the UK, they're like, "Who's Wiggle?"
It's interesting because I think like Bluey obviously is also Australian, and they have Aussie accents. The characters all have Aussie accents, and that's been pretty well received on a global level. It'd be very interesting to see like how does Bluey stand up against like a Peppa Pig who has a British accent in the UK. From what I understand, Bluey is popular in almost all corners of the globe right now.
I think the fact that it's animation allows it to cut through people's like preconceived ideas about things as well. I think when it's live action and it's real people, there's a sense we carry a lot more predisposed ideas when, oh, it's a woman, it's a man, it's a person from this cultural background or whatever. Like, I think, whereas when it's an animated blue heeler dog,
yeah,
she's whatever you need her to be, So I think that's where animation is really powerful. And I think it's less confronting, for want of a better term, or I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean? Yeah, I think it's just a bit more amenable to lots of different cultures and backgrounds.
Yeah. So are you still paying attention to what's happening with the Wiggles today?
Do you know, I was just watching. It's funny you said before about how obviously it's been consumed differently now, because I follow them on Instagram, and Dominic Field, who's the Tree of Life. I was watching, he's amazing. It's just so bonkers. I love it. I still love it so much. And it's really interesting now because obviously it started with the four individuals, the four boys to start. And then due to illness, one of them needed to change over. And we were like, can this brand live beyond just these four faces? It'd be like, oh, can you change Ringo out from behind the drum set at the Beatles and it's still the Beatles, And the answer is, when it came to the Wiggles, the answer was yes. Like, the kids went for it because, again, they just see the different coloured shirts and it's still the same characters. And that's when we knew this brand had real longevity. And now they're up to, I don't even know what iteration. And, Lucia Field is one of the Wiggles now. That's Anthony's daughter. So the original Wiggle's daughter is now Wiggle, and it's just incredible. Like, so yeah, so I still follow not everything because they do so much. I feel like they're still in that world of churning out an incredible amount of content. But yeah, it is just mad seeing the ways that it's spin and what resonates with people. All of a sudden you see the Tree of Life going viral and you're like, of course the Tree of Life is viral. Why wouldn't it be?
Yeah, of course.
One of the
Well, thanks, Michelle.
The Tree of Wisdom. Sorry, I got that wrong.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining the podcast. This has been so interesting. It's always so interesting to hear about other people's experience in the licensing space, particularly working for, such a big brand that was so successful. You have such an interesting story. So thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you. And sorry, I have so many stories that I haven't told in so long. So sorry if that I rambled a bit there. But yeah, there's so many facets to it. And yeah, it was an incredible opportunity and one I'll always be grateful for. And I think it's a story that stands the test of time, what they have done and continue to do. And I think all brands that are having that cut through and the power that they can have is just, yeah. And it's not just on the end users, it's the people that get to work there as well. That's really special.
Yeah. Exactly. What an amazing experience. How happy are you that you called Mike from the newspaper?
Can you believe it? Brand manager wanted, call Mike. I was like, this is going to go one of two ways.
Isn't it amazing? It's very much a sliding doors moment. If you had never seen that advert, if you'd never called, if they'd never picked up, all of these things like that really set you on a path of your career that if that moment hadn't happened, who knows where you'd be, what you'd be doing, what you would have done instead,
It's unbelievable. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's one of those real pinch me moments when I think, that's what I just feel. I'm honestly was so lucky. I just got lucky.
Yeah, well, thanks again for sharing with us. And really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, David. Lovely to chat.
Sure. You too.
Okay, bye.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Born to License podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're eager to learn more about licensing, I encourage you, take a look at my course, Learn to License. I've condensed almost 20 years of learning in my licensing career to help others understand how licensing works. And as a reward for sticking around, here is a discount code for you to put in. I hope to see you there.